Hi everyone, this lesson is for Friday, April 3rd. We're going to talk about counterarguments today. This lesson is going to be pretty short because I don't think counterarguments require that much explanation. I don't want to over-explain it and create confusion. Also, a lot of the information I'm going to be referencing today or quoting comes from Harvard's Writing Center. But basically, a counter argument is, let's say you're writing your paper from a pro-choice perspective. Then, at some point in your paper, you will engage with a pro-life perspective. Because that's the opposite. That's the opposite of what you're arguing. That's what a counter argument means. But then what you need to do is you take the opposite. So again, you're writing, your entire paper is about pro-choice, and the counter argument is pro-life. You engage with the pro-life. But as you're engaging with the pro-life, you circle it back around to serve and support your argument. So you kind of counter the counter argument. And that will make a little bit of more sense as I go through these slides. So again, this is from Harvard's Writing Center's website. When you write an academic essay, you make an argument. You propose a thesis and offer some reasoning using evidence that suggests why the thesis is true. When you counter-argue, you consider a possible argument against your thesis or some aspect of your reasoning. Now, you're not negating your argument, okay? You're not contradicting yourself by engaging with a counter-argument, because you're going to bring it back around to your original argument. So, as this point down here conveys, counter-arguments are important because they allow you to anticipate any arguments from someone who is of the opposite point of view as you. I'm sure when you are listening to someone argue ideologies you don't agree with, you're already preparing in your head how you're going to argue back at them or point out flaws in their logic. So the counter argument allows you to be one step ahead of anyone who might come and discredit you or try and poke holes in your argument. It also allows you to build your ethos by showing that you acknowledge that there are other points of view out there. So it allows you to anticipate doubts and preempt objections that a skeptical reader might have. It presents you as the kind of person who weighs alternatives before arguing for one, who confronts difficulties instead of sweeping them under the rug, who is more interested in discovering the truth than winning a point. Okay, again, not to be shady, but the argumentative research paper is it's a manipulation of language. Okay, you may not really care what the other side thinks on your topic, but, it shows good sportsmanship, so to speak, for you to acknowledge, like, hey, this other side exists. I'm going to give them a little bit of stage time, but I'm going to do so in a way that serves my larger purpose. So, the turn against. Counter-argument in an essay has two stages. You turn against your argument to challenge it, and then you turn back to reaffirm it. So, like going back with that pro-choice, pro-life perspective. Your argument is pro-choice. Your counter-argument is pro-life, and then you're going to turn back and reaffirm pro-choice. So first imagine a skeptical reader, or cite an actual source who might resist your argument by pointing out a problem with your demonstration. Example, that a different conclusion could be drawn from the same facts, a key assumption is unwarranted, a key term is used unfairly, certain evidence is ignored or played down, one or more disadvantages or practical drawbacks to what you propose, or an alternative explanation or proposal that makes more sense. So that's what you're doing with your counter argument. You're just acknowledging that there might be a flaw in your argument or a hole in your argument, or that the other side has some good points too. Then again, circling it back around to reaffirm your original argument. You introduce this turn against with a phrase like, one might object here that, or it might seem that, or it's true that, or admittedly, or of course, or with an anticipated challenging question, but how, or but why, or but isn't this just, or but if this is so, what about? Then you state the case against yourself as briefly but as clearly and forcefully as you can, pointing to evidence wherever possible. So you remember you were supposed to be looking for sources that could support a counter argument. Or maybe some of your sources engaged with the counter argument and you can use that as an indirect source. So you're turning against your argument, and now you're turning back towards your argument. Your return to your own argument, which you announce with a but, yet, however, nevertheless, or still, must likewise involve careful reasoning, not a flippant or nervous dismissal. In reasoning about the proposed counter-argument, you may refute it, showing why it is mistaken, an apparent but not real problem, acknowledge its validity or plausibility, but suggest why, on balance, it's relatively less important or less likely than what you propose, and thus doesn't overturn it. Concede its force and complicate your idea accordingly, restate your thesis in a more exact, qualified, or nuanced way that takes account of the objection, or start a new section in which you consider your topic in light of it. This will work if the counter-argument concerns only an aspect of your argument. If it undermines your whole case, you need a new thesis. So that last bit is important. But hopefully at this point, the research that you've done, you know that your thesis is solid, or at least the point you want to argue is solid and isn't going to be completely torn apart by a counter-argument. So where you place your counter-argument is completely up to you. It can be part of your introduction before you propose your thesis. I don't recommend doing that though. I just think for like where we are at in our academic writing careers, it would not be effective for you to begin your paper with a counter argument. You can have your counter argument come not that far after your introduction, or you don't even need it to be an entire paragraph necessarily. It could be a quick move within a body paragraph, or it can come right before your conclusion. So I recommend doing like these last two, and I'm going to read these in more detail. So I recommend having your counter argument be a quick move within a paragraph where you imagine a counter argument not to your main idea, but to the sub-idea that the paragraph is arguing or is about to argue. Or it can be a paragraph just before the conclusion of your essay in which you imagine what someone might object to what you have argued. So I recommend one of these last 2 points. So like a quick acknowledgement, or, a solid paragraph that comes kind of at the end. But again, you need to make sure you're turning the counter argument back around in order to reaffirm your original argument. So that's all I have to say about counter arguments. Because again, it's really up to you and how your essay is structured, with how much time you want to spend acknowledging a counter argument, entertaining a counter argument, where you want it to show up. Okay? But you're still going to be like referencing evidence, an outside source, as part of your counter argument. So I hope this wasn't too brief. Trying to give you all, a little less work, but I don't want to sacrifice that. Like, I don't want to sacrifice course content and like what you actually learn from the course content in order to maybe alleviate some pressure on your mental health regarding how overwhelmed you may or may not feel, if that makes sense. So if you have any questions about counter arguments, please let me know. And don't forget that there is this document, templates for implementing sources. I talked about this in the first video of the week, but if you scroll down towards the end of this, you can have some templates for initiating a counter argument, like entertaining objections here, introducing objections, all that good stuff. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please reach out sooner rather than later, and I will talk to you all later.